David Saperstein, a rabbi and a lawyer, and someone who's been blessed to have spent his entire career working in the field of social justice. This moment, this extraordinary convergence of Lent and Ramadan and Passover all coming at the same time, for Jews generally around the world, and certainly in North America, sitting around the Seder table and telling the Passover story is the most common expression of Jewish ritual identity in people's lives. And the power of that 3,000-year-old, 3,200-year-old story of the Jewish people going from slavery to freedom in all the difficult travails that journey took them on has had a profound impact on the Jewish people and on my life. That story of the call to stand up to oppression, that slavery is wrong, that oppression is wrong, that persecution is wrong. It is not what God wants. And God stands up to those who are tyrants and calls us to stand up to those who are tyrants, to go like Moses, to confront power in which uses that power immorally and unjustly, but also to empower the people to take the very difficult journey to freedom. It is a story that has been replayed in every time and clime throughout human history. And that model of Passover has been an inspiration to so many others who have struggled for their own freedom against their own oppression that they are suffering. And it is a source of pride, I think, to Jews that this is such an important kind of meta-narrative about the human condition and what God wants in terms of justice and freedom for all people. And it is certainly a message that is needed today as much as it has been needed throughout the many centuries since.
Thank you. So will you tell us a little bit about how you're living into that message today, the ways that you're working for and proclaiming freedom and prophetic justice-seeking work that you're doing?
So, I was blessed to have a father who was a rabbi known for his social justice work. I grew up outside of New York. My mother was extraordinarily active in a range of civic affairs, helped create the first Long Island Women's Forum, bringing together 200 women's groups in the 1950s to talk about issues of concern to women in the fight for women's rights. And in my town was a model town for the test case for the NAACP in New York State to confront de facto segregation. And my mother was one of the committee of 8 that led that successful battle to desegregate the elementary school system in my town. So being raised in the 1960s, in which social justice was such a hallmark of American society, in a liberal religious tradition that cherished social justice, Judaism in general has always been concerned about social justice. In the 3,000-year-old covenant at Sinai that brought ethical monotheism into the world here, but certainly Reform Judaism made it even more of a centerpiece of Jewish expression. So my entire life was infused societally, religiously, personally in my family that led me to meld religion and social justice in my life. And over the decades, I've been blessed to have many different iterations, one long job for 40 years leading the social justice work of the National Reform Jewish Movement, the largest segment of American Jewry, but many iterations and many causes. Religious groups are often convinced they can speak authoritatively on any domestic and foreign policy issue. And so they don't hesitate to look at it through the ethical lens that their religious beliefs bring to contemporary society and speak out. And one of the blessings of my life is a broad range of environmental and economic justice and peace and civil rights coalitions, amongst many others, that I've been honored to be part of and work together with people for the common good in America and across the globe. That work continues for me now. I'm still working with the Reform movement. I have an extraordinary successor heading the Religious Action Center that I led for 40 years, a dear friend and inspiring religious leader, Rabbi Jonah Pesner. And so we're working together every day and with the other leaders of the Reform movement to continue these battles. Right now, we're focused on racial justice in America, on environmental justice in America, on reproductive rights and the battle to protect reproductive rights and to protect separation of church and state. These are some of my key priorities. Obviously, the fight against the growth of hate crimes in America and across the globe, of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred that seem to have been given more authorization to be spoken, be acted on in so many countries across the globe. This is all part of the major fight we have. And I would say, finally, for anyone who, like myself, is in Ohev Yisrael, a lover of Israel, watching with a great deal of alarm and sadness the continued oppression of the Palestinians, a government coming into power at this moment that threatens the democratic character of and the extraordinary melding of Judaism and democracy that the founding vision of Israel was all about, is a central concern for so many of us around the globe. So those are, and I guess I would have to add the battle for religious freedom everywhere, particularly on the global level, with so many religious minorities, the victims of genocide, the victims of ethnic cleansing, the victims of persecution, subject, as I said, to Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and all kinds of other anti-minority kind of feelings across the globe. That remains, it was the work I did for the Obama administration, and it is the work that I continue today. So a full plate, and it's been the blessing of my life that someone has been hired me to, or have been paying me to do this extraordinary work. Now that I've reached that point in my life where I'm mostly doing it just out of the love of the work, it is as rewarding as it ever was.
Thank you so much. As you've been engaging that work now and throughout your life, what resistance have you encountered, and how have you handled that resistance?
I think everyone who works in the social justice realm, whether they're liberals like I am, whether they're conservatives here, whatever their religious or political views might be, if they're really struggling for social justice, they're going to get pushback. They're going to get pushback from people who read the sacred text differently than I do, who hear God's call differently than I do. To me, it's self-evident that God has called us to do God's work here on earth precisely by bringing justice to the world, precisely by ending racism in the world, precisely by ending poverty in the world, the concern for the vulnerable, the weak, the widow and the orphan, the elderly, the oppressed, the persecuted. Here, there can't be a clearer call than by God in the Bible to look out for the stranger, the one who would otherwise be the other or the outsider. For it's the most common repeated commandment in the Bible, and the mandate for us to ensure the hungry are fed and the naked are clothed and the prisoner is set free resonates over the thousands of years since the words of the Bible were first set forth. So, that's how I hear God's message, but I respect that others don't. And often there'll be pushback, just as some have a religious message that I would push back on and challenge as best I can. I think the religious community at its best is an important model to the world of the possibility of working together across different lines. There is more interfaith cooperation and activity going on the global level today than at any point in human history. Here, we focus very often on the divisions and the hatreds, but there's extraordinary efforts in almost every country across the globe for people of different faiths to work together on each other's behalf, standing up for each other when one group is being persecuted. Here, particularly when the majority stands up for minorities who are subject to discrimination and persecution, but working together for the common good to make sure their kids really are fed and have health care and decent education, and that we're protecting God's creation here on earth. None of us can do it alone. And when we really work together effectively, not only can we be almost geometrically more impactful, more empowering than any of us could be alone, but we're modeling the very kind of world that we're trying to create. We are a living lesson that what we're trying to create and calling for actually is doable. And I think that's needed today more than ever.
Well, this question may kind of follow up on that theme you were giving us there, but what in this work inspires you and gives you hope? What are you looking forward to with hopeful expectation?
This is a very difficult moment in human history. First, the growth of autocracies across the globe. You know, the Freedom House tells us from the end of World War II until about 2006, there was an ebb and flow on a global level of where the mean was in terms of the movement towards democracy or away from it, the movement towards human rights or away from it. But if you look at the midpoint, it's solidly moved from a more oppressive model at the end of World War II to a much more democratic, human rights-oriented world. And from 2006 until today, there's back and forth, but it's moved back in the opposite direction. That's tremendously alarming because we're talking about billions of people who still live under oppression and denied fundamental basic human rights in the world today. We thought we were making such progress towards a different world. So there's an urgency for us to do this work today. But I guess we also have a sense that we live in a moment where the problems are not new, but because of technology, the consequences of wrong decisions are greater than ever before. We've always had warfare, but not the kind of warfare that could blow up the world in a nuclear holocaust. We've always had damage, concern about damage to the environment, to God's creation, the laws in the Bible, and for us in the post-biblical era, the era Christianity formed, talk about the obligation to protect the air and the water. There are all kinds of rules about not wasting things here. That was central to our thinking, but not the kind of threats to our environment that could alter the very climate of the globe because of what we've done. We've always had intrusions into our freedoms. So we're not a match with the kind of technology that can make Orwell's nightmare of 1984 the reality of the world. We've always had economic injustice, but not in a world where the have-nots know exactly what the haves have and are demanding their fair share of this. And the instability that the haves trying to hold on to their disproportionate share is unsettling the entire world. The United States makes up 5% of the population, consumes 20% of the calorie and energy in the world. There's nothing left in the world if everyone consumed at that rate. There'd be enough for only 20%, and 80% would literally have nothing. That's not a sustainable model. And we've always had the questions of how to apply new technologies in an ethical manner, but not when genetic engineering creates new forms of life. AI can alter everything that we understand about things, about the way that information functions and technology functions in the world today. So we kind of have the feeling that this is a test run. Everything before us was a test run. We're the first generation in human history that doesn't have the ability to learn, to make the same mistakes again and learn from them. It's as though everything was a dry run, and this time it counts. And as the great Catholic ethicist Brian Hare once observed, in the space of the lifetime of some people alive today, we've cracked the genetic code, pierced the veil of outer space itself, split the atom here. And in a world in which you can do almost anything, what you should do, the moral question, is a great question facing humanity. And on that, the religious community has such important contribution to make in terms of shaping the values and the direction that the world is going to go in. But this is also the first generation that produces enough food to actually feed every person on earth if we did it equitably and distributed it equitably. A failure to do it now is a failure of moral vision and political will. We're the first generation that can educate every child on earth. A failure to do it now is a failure of moral vision and political will. We can cure diseases that have plagued humanity from time immemorial. A failure to do it now is a failure of moral vision and political will. Go down the list. There are extraordinary things. If we act, we can save God's creation, the environment, but we have to do it now. Here we live at a time where we have the technology and the ability to do all these things. Will we have the moral vision and the political will to do it? And that, again, the religious communities of the world have something vital, urgent, and an important to say, and an important role to play in making those words come true. So my mentor, Al Vorspan, used to be fond of saying the difference between an optimist and a pessimist is that an optimist argues that this is the best of all possible worlds, and a pessimist agrees. We religious people, we in general tend to be the great optimists of the world. The belief that we are not the prisoners of a bitter and unremitting past, but we can be, we must be, we will be the shapers of a better and more hopeful future for all God's children, knowing that I stand together with billions of people who share those religious dreams and values of what the world can be. That is, to me, the greatest source of optimism and hope. I see it at the local level, where people are being empowered to do this work. I see it at the global level, where those messages still resonate with power that can help shape the direction we're going.